What's up, Seniesa Estrada here, and I just want to give a huge special shout out to the relay. Thank you so much for all of the continuous support, and thank you for all of the support during and after and before every single fight.
Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news. Ow!
Okay, we'll start with this. Well, the world is still reacting to Seniesa Estrada's titillating KO over Miranda Atkins in Golden Boy's card. And, you know, it's not just the pundits, it's not just the fight fans that are taking notice of Seniesa Estrada. Flyweight champion Naoko Fujioka took to Instagram and posted this, which reads, "Congrats on your KO win. You did it within 7 seconds. That is amazing. However, you should have met me in the ring, not Atkins. I look forward to having a match with you when I have a visa." For clarity, one must understand that Naoko wasn't actually available to fight. Naoko Fujioka, the WBA flyweight champion who's based out of Japan. With the current travel restrictions, a fight between Naoko and Seniesa here and now isn't possible.
Not till those travel restrictions are lifted.
So one mustn't take Naoko Fujioka's comments out of context. That it should have been Naoko that Seniesa was fighting, and yes, perhaps it should have been.
Yeah.
But that wasn't possible, and that's where Miranda Atkins came into the picture. Perhaps if it wasn't for the global pandemic and the travel restrictions, Seniesa Estrada's fight would have been a full-fledged title fight. But that's the kind of fight that they couldn't make for her because all these champions that are out there are in different countries. They ain't in the United States.
They ain't here.
In that situation, you work with what you've got. And Naoko Fujioka of Japan wasn't the only reigning world champion that reacted to Seniesa Estrada's KO. Argentina's Jessica Tuti Bopp, the legendary Jessica Tuti Bopp, who fights downstairs from Naoko in the light flyweight division. That's the 108-pound division where Seniesa Estrada took on Miranda Atkins. She said, "Así, con esa rival, gana por KO cualquiera. Seniesa, pongamos fecha. No soy igual a la última rival." Essentially, the WBA's light flyweight champion is throwing a bit of shade here, and what that translates into, basically, is that anybody could have knocked out Miranda.
Not wrong.
She's telling Seniesa to set the date, because she's not like that girl that she just fought.
He's not wrong about that either.
To say that the very accomplished Naoko Fujioka of Japan or the very accomplished Jessica Tuti Bopp of Argentina are far more adept for this task than Miranda was would be a gross understatement.
Yeah.
I mean, it really would. Believe you me, those two girls, those two world champions, those two decorated veterans would put up a far better fight than anything Miranda could have done. But I stand by my original assertions. I will say that Seniesa Estrada is very much ready to become a full-fledged world champion herself, whether it's at light flyweight or flyweight. That means whether it's against Jessica Tuti Bopp or Naoko Fujioka. If we delve a little deeper into that conversation, I'm settled on Seniesa Estrada beating Naoko. Naoko's getting a bit long in the tooth.
She's tough.
I don't think that she's got it to keep up with the athleticism and speed, reflexes and combinations, the footwork of Seniesa Estrada. Not at this point, not at this age. Naoko's 44 fucking years old. You want to make the situation worse? Here's how we make the situation worse. Naoko hasn't had a fight since July of last year. If she were to, hypothetically speaking, fight Seniesa Estrada in Senesia's very next fight, it will have been over a year that this 44-year-old fighter threw a punch at anybody. I think that Naoko, even now, even at 44, can put up a far better fight than Miranda Atkins did. But I don't think that she can win the fight. Not against Seniesa.
Not here today.
Not off of a year of inactivity at 44 fucking years old. No, sir. I give Seniesa very good odds to beat Naoko Fujioka and become the WBA's flyweight champion. In the case of Jessica Tuti Bopp, different set of circumstances.
Different fighter.
You see, the same things that make Seniesa Estrada such a great fighter are the same things that make and have made Jessica Bopp a great fighter, a dominant fighter. 37 pro fights, only one loss, never been stopped. Long-reigning WBA champion. Debuted back in 2008. Argentina's Jessica Bopp. She hasn't lost a fight in 7 years. 7 fucking years. Hasn't lost a fight since 2013. Has won 12 consecutive victories since 2013. the current reigning WBA light flyweight champion, someone with the same characteristics and attributes as Seniesa Estrada, who is more hardened, more seasoned, and more maturated than Seniesa Estrada is here today. Some of the same things that make Seniesa Estrada such a dangerous opponent for anybody from 105 to 108 to 112 pounds are the same things that have made Jessica Bopp as dominant as she has been. The athleticism, the footwork, the in and out game, the combinations, the hand speed, the punching power. These are all qualities that Jessica Bopp has. And out of all the potential opponent options for Seniesa Estrada, anywhere from 105 to 112 pounds. I mean, you're talking about the Annabelle Ortiz title fight. You're talking about the Yesenia Gomez title fight. You're talking about the Naoko Fujioka title fight. And you're talking about the Jessica Bopp title fight. Out of those four world champions spread out from 105 to 112, Jessica Bopp is the most formidable, is the more dangerous fight for Seniesa Estrada. And Jessica, she ain't 44 years old like Naoko. She's a very spry 36. She's 8 years older than Seniesa, but there's no doubt in my mind that she's still got it. For Christ's sake, she qualified to represent Argentina in the Olympics before everything got shut down. And she still has plans of doing so, going to Tokyo once the Olympic Games resume, which puts a time constraint on when an Estrada versus Bopp fight can happen. I will reiterate, that is the most dangerous fight for Seniesa Estrada. Out of the four champions, Annabelle Ortiz, Yesenia Gomez, Naoko Fujioka, and Jessica Bopp,
It's Argentina's own.
it's Jessica that stands the best chance of holding on to her title, though. It is also Jessica whose dance card might be booked, depending on how the cookie crumbles. When do the travel restrictions get lifted? When can she fly over from Argentina? And is that going to get in the way of her Olympic run? I told you guys that in spite of what criticisms are being levied against Seniesa and against Golden Boy for Miranda Atkins as an opponent option, this knockout is still getting Seniesa Estrada all the right attention, as there are now some very notoriable fighters, some very notoriable champions knocking at her door. And now she has no shortage of options, no shortage of paths to become a full-fledged world champion herself in the very near future, once these travel restrictions are lifted. Given the reaction that this knockout is getting, I've no doubts that Golden Boy is set to book Seniesa Estrada's very next fight in a jiffy. I look forward to seeing what's next in the career of Seniesa Estrada. In other Golden Boy related news, that same card I might add, Ryan Garcia took to Twitter and said, "The disrespect I hear the commentators have when I'm mentioned during a fight gives me the chip on my shoulder and that motivation. Thank you. I'll be coming with everything I've got." And Ryan Garcia, I mean, he's not the only one that noticed that as far as the commentating during Virgil Ortiz's fight with Samuel Vargas, that entire broadcast
Take shots.
seemed to have been throwing shade at Ryan. I mean, that's what they seem to have been doing. Ryan noticed, like many people noticed. It's no secret that Ryan is having it out with the people over there, Golden Boy, Oscar, Eric Gomez, all those guys. They're not seeing eye to eye. I myself think that Ryan
Being Sadetty.
is being a bit of a prima donna, that yes, you have a very big social media following, and that could potentially translate into more celebrity, more attention for your fights, but you're not yet in a place where you can constantly make demands. You're not even a world champion yet. Hell, you're not even an interim champion to any major title that's out there. So what you've got to do is pump the brakes and do the work. You might notice that a very well-known pundit that goes by the name of Steve Kim refers to Virgil Ortiz as low maintenance. That is the nickname he has given Virgil because Virgil, unlike Ryan, doesn't have any of the demands, any of the issues that Ryan is having, yet Virgil is a little further along than Ryan. That's right, he's a little bit more developed. Think about the guys that Virgil has been starching, the guys that Virgil has been stopping, and compare those guys to the guys that Ryan's been in there with. Virgil's been in there with the likes of a Mauricio Herrera, a very experienced guy who's been in there with anyone from Saddam Ali to Danny Garcia,
Gomez,
Jose Benavidez, Hank Lundy, Pablo Cano, I mean, you name him.
and Herrera's been in there with them.
Virgil stopped that guy. He stopped Mauricio Herrera. He stopped Antonio Orozco, a guy who only had one loss ahead of that fight with Virgil, and that was to Jose Ramirez. Virgil, he stopped that guy too. He stopped Brad Solomon. Brad Solomon, who only had one loss himself.
Ahead of that fight.
That was to Konstantin Ponomarev. Before that Virgil Ortiz fight, Brad Solomon had never been stopped.
Antonio Orozco had never been stopped either.
Or Mauricio Herrera. Out of the 9 professional losses that Mauricio has suffered throughout his career, only one of them came by way of knockout, and that knockout was at the hands of Virgil Ortiz. In his most recent outing, goes in there with Samuel Vargas, the very experienced Samuel Vargas, who's been in there with Errol Spence and Danny Garcia and Amir Khan, and he dominates that guy from start to finish. He dominates that guy. He stops that guy too. And ahead of that fight, this kid only had 15 pro fights. That's where Virgil Ortiz is at. Whereas Ryan Garcia, same age group as Virgil. Ryan's 21, Virgil's 22. Ryan's got 4 more fights than Virgil does, but better still, Ryan's not even there yet. He's not at that point where he's having those kinds of fights, putting on those kinds of performance. I mean, we're still waiting for him to have those kinds of fights, and he hasn't had them yet, but he's got all these demands. Highfalutin.
Raising all kinds of hell.
Kid's always complaining. So when he sees the shade being thrown at him, he says that gives him the chip on his shoulder and that he's going to be coming with everything he's got. That's fine. You can do that. But do that against someone formidable. Do that against someone who can really fight back, because up until now, Ryan Garcia's been winning the kind of fights that he's supposed to be able to win, the way he's supposed to be able to win them. We need to see another layer of this kid. We need to see another layer of this fighter. We need to see how he reacts to someone who's not just going to lay down. Someone who's formidable. Someone like Luke Campbell. That is the proverbial coming-of-age fight. Ryan Garcia, he can make these kinds of assertions and these kinds of promises on social media till he's blue in the face. Until he actually does it, till he actually has those fights, the jury's out. And finally, we come to the Joyce versus Wallisch card featured on ESPN+. This was a keep busy kind of fight, tune-up kind of fight for Joe. Joe, who hasn't had a fight since August of last year when he locked horns with Philadelphia's own Bryant Jennings.
It was a year ago, if you can believe that.
Joe Joyce managed to advance to a professional record of 11 wins, no losses, with 10 knockouts. And this fight didn't reveal anything to us about Joe that we didn't already know, aside from his current condition. Joe walked in there with a bit of a spare tire, could have done with a sports bra from the look of him. Joe looked a bit soft in the body, walked in there a bit heavier than usual, 270, something like that, whereas he normally hovers around 250, 260.
Around there.
And the fight lasted all of 3 rounds, with Joe dropping Wallisch en route to this stoppage.
2 times.
It was the body shots that did the job, and you saw everything from Joe that you've more or less already been seeing from Joe. Relentless pressure.
Punching power.
A good variety of punches up top and downstairs. Joe certainly didn't abandon the body punching in this fight. He made it a point to go there and go there early, and it did the trick. Whether it was a stab to the body or a hook to the body, Joe Joyce knew to go there, and that's really what wrapped this thing up. That's really what sealed the deal. But along with what you expect to see from Joe in terms of the offense department, you also saw what you expect to see from Joe in the defense department, and it's that Joe doesn't have the best defensive prowess. It's a bit leaky. Ate a couple of right hands that I felt, if they were coming from someone else, a more interesting puncher, perhaps Joe would be worse for wear. Talking about Daniel Dubois, let's be honest, that's the fight we've all got on our minds. If I'm being honest, it's not like I was expecting to see anything new from Joe or anything that was going to change my mind as far as what I think is going to happen in the Daniel Dubois fight. It's been 12 months since Joe saw any action, so I'm not expecting him to have picked up any new tricks during the lockdown. Got what I expected, and I saw what I expected to see. You know, I remember in that Bryant Jennings fight, Bryant Jennings, a guy who's a good boxer, slickster, not the biggest puncher, but a guy who was getting off some quality shots in that Joe Joyce fight. I vaguely recall Bryant Jennings landing the right hand. And in this fight with Wallisch, we saw something similar. The overhand right was finding a home in spots. It landed a bit too much for my taste. These are holes, these are problem areas that I think Daniel Dubois, in spite of being on the young side, can exploit when him and Joe enter into the squared circle. You know, Daniel Dubois got a quality jab, quality right hand, good one too. Steps into his jab, fires the shot, the straight shot from the outside coming in. I feel like Joe Joyce he's going to be there to receive it, except that Daniel is a much more interesting puncher than Wallisch. I mean, I think it's safe to say that. I think it's safe to say that Daniel packs more power in the punch than Michel Wallisch does.
Yeah, I think so.
Than Michel Wallisch did in this fight. So if Daniel manages to land that straight right hand, I think it'll get a lot more respect from Joe, have more of an effect on Joe, than anything Wallisch brought to the table. I've heard it said that Daniel Dubois, he doesn't move his head. He doesn't stay off the center enough, and that could be a problem for him. That could leave him on the receiving end of some hard shots coming from Joe Joyce. But I'm still of the opinion that Daniel Dubois, he's got the edge in speed. And this fight might not come down to punching power, but who can beat the other guy to the punch. Who can get off and who can get off first. And I still feel that Daniel Dubois, he's got Joe beat in that department. That while Joe, he might have fought a better quality of competition as a professional. I think we can say that. And I certainly think he has a more experienced amateur background than Daniel.
He does.
I feel like this layoff affected Joe more so than it's affected Daniel. Joe's an older guy than Daniel. 12 years older, to be exact. Joe's 34 years old, whereas Daniel's a very spry 22. I think that's evident in Joe's spare tire, which he brought to this fight. You know, after a certain age, your metabolism, it starts to slow down, and moving forward, Joe's probably going to have to shed that excess weight ahead of the Daniel Dubois fight set to go down this fall before the year is out. You wonder that won't have some kind of an effect on Joe's ability to perform. I mean, it might not, though I will say I had Daniel beating Joe before COVID shut everything down.
Doesn't even matter.
I'm pretty settled on that. Joe just hasn't convinced me. He hasn't made me a believer in spite of his extensive amateur background and having fought more seasoned professionals as a professional than Daniel Dubois has. I still don't really view Joe as a put-together fighter, a put-together product, a finished product. I mean, how many trainers has this guy gone through in what are now 11 pro fights? What, he was with Ishmael Salas, and then he was with Adam Booth, and then Abel Sanchez, back to Ishmael Salas.
The fuck?
The guy's got a pro record of 11-0, bouncing from trainer to trainer. I just don't like the look of that. Heard some very convincing arguments in favor of Joe winning that Dubois fight, but I'm just not buying it. I'm just not sold. And I certainly didn't see anything in this Wallisch fight to change my mind, so same applies. I'm still going with Daniel Dubois to knock this guy out. Just think that given Joe's implementation, his relentless pressure fighting, staying in front of a guy close to him, is going to see him walking into some hard shots from Daniel Dubois, who's not afraid to let him go when he's touched. But yes, Daniel is the greener fighter in every way, but he also happens to be the faster fighter, and I think that will see him getting the better of the exchanges, beating Joe Joyce to the punch, and ultimately winning the fight.